Most interviews today are competency-based interviews, but it's a term that can be confusing. And in this short video, I'm going to take you through what is a competency, some of the common competencies, and most importantly, how they're assessed during an interview. So what is a competency? A competency is an important skill or attribute that's required to perform effectively in a role. What the organisation have done is they've looked at the specific skills and experience and judgment that they want successful candidates to have, and they will have listed those in the job description. So common competencies are things like communication skills or organisational skills, maybe being part of a team or a team player. For more senior positions, it might be leadership and people management. So how are competencies assessed in an interview? Well, there's three common ways. The first one, and by far the most popular, is through past examples. So if you're aware of what the competencies are, good preparation means identifying some examples that you can draw on. So during the interview, you might simply be asked, give us an example of how you demonstrated good leadership skills, or talk me through how you use your influencing skills. The STAR framework, or the STAR approach, S-T-A-R, is a common framework that's used now to assess competencies, and it's based on common sense. So if we look at it, the S and the T stands for situation or task, or as I like to say, you're setting the scene. So a few lines to set the scene of the example you're sharing. A is the important bit. A stands for action. So what is it that you did? That's the part that interviewers are particularly interested in, because they're working from the belief that the best indication of future behaviour is past behaviour. So they want to know what you did in this scenario, how you applied the skill and the competency, and the judgment you used. The R part of the STAR framework, is result. So what's the result? What was the outcome? How did the example finish or close? And if there's no tangible or obvious result, you can always emphasize your learning here. So what is it that you learned through this example? The second way that competencies are assessed at an interview is through a hypothetical scenario. So the interviewer will describe a situation and ask you what you would do in that situation. So perhaps as an example, if people management is a competency, they might set the scene around, if you have someone on your team who's not performing, how would you deal with that? And then you look at answering it. Most hypothetical scenarios will be based on common sense situations. So if you think about some of the scenarios you might have to deal with in the particular role, perhaps we can think around some of the situations that might come up. If the hypothetical scenario is similar to something that you've already dealt with, you can bridge back to your own experience as well. The hypothetical situation is also used because maybe interviewers just want to see if you can think on your feet. The third way that competencies can be assessed is through a competency definition. Now, interviewers are not interested in some dictionary definition of a competency or an academic definition. They just want to know your understanding of the competency. And this form of assessing competencies is most suited to some of the soft skills, so maybe things like leadership or communication. So you might get a question like, what's at the heart of good leadership? Or what are some of the factors that are important in communication? So you're speaking around your understanding of the competency. It doesn't have to be a dictionary definition. So they're the three common ways that competencies are assessed: past experiences, hypothetical situations, and definition or an understanding of the competency. Now, there is a fourth way, and it doesn't happen that often, but if it does, it's a real curveball question. It's what I phrase as negative competencies or reverse competencies. It's when the question is something like, tell me about a time when your leadership skills or your communication skills let you down. So if you think about how we prepare for interview, it's always about, examples or situations that show us in the best possible light. But now you're being asked a scenario where maybe things didn't work out as you would have wished. It's a bit like the weaknesses question at an interview. The interviewer is particularly interested in your levels of self-awareness and what you learned. And that's the clue for answering those tricky questions. So think of a scenario where, with the benefit of hindsight, you would have done something differently. And of course, your focus is on what you learned from that. So I hope these few tips on competencies and how they're assessed at an interview have been helpful, and it kickstarts your own preparation for any interview you have coming up.